So some of the key drivers that I believe houses, like all things in economy, is a supply and demand equation. And what's actually happening in the market at the moment, from what I can see, is we have pent up demand and not enough supply. And that's what's really driving house prices and making it unaffordable for first home buyers in Sydney. If we actually unpack and look at what's actually happening at the moment, what's driving the supply? It's migration. The information provided in this podcast is for general purposes only and should not be considered personal advice. Always consult with qualified professionals or experts in the relevant field for personalized advice tailored to your specific situation. Hey everyone, this is Scott. Thanks for joining me on Catching Up with Property. In this episode, we're going to unpack housing affordability in Sydney. So some of the key drivers that I believe houses, like all things in economy, is a supply and demand equation. And what's actually happening in the market at the moment, from what I can see, is we have pent up demand and not enough supply. And that's what's really driving house prices and making it unaffordable for first home buyers in Sydney. If we actually unpack and look at what's actually happening at the moment, what's driving the supply? It's migration. So we have rapid migration, and from the estimates at the moment in March 2023, the ABS estimate 454,000 new migrants have entered into Australia. So naturally you think 454,000 people, they're coming into this country. Where are they going to live? They're going to have to live in the existing supply of housing, and that creates pent-up pressure and demand in the housing market. Now, the other side of that is supply. So do we have new stock or new properties going onto the market right now? And if you think about it, over COVID, the government tried to stimulate that by incentivizing new home builders, grants, etc. But we know that during COVID and because of COVID, a lot of builders ended up going into struggle phase. And why was that? That was because of cost of materials, lockdowns. Builders had to sign contracts, deliver on time, but maybe couldn't deliver on time because there were lockdowns. They still had to pay for the staff. They had to sign on contracts on, say, day one at $1, and then on day 30, they probably had to pay $3. And naturally, economies of scale, they're paying more than what they agreed on. So unfortunately, there's a lot of builders that have gone under. And if you look at the data in terms of insolvencies for the building industry, there's estimated around 2,100 builders in 2023 that decide to close shop. If you're talking about supply, who's going to supply the new building into the market right now? It's builders. Builders have to build. So if you have 2,100 builders closing up shop, I don't know, there's a bit of a problem. You have builders, you don't have that many builders to help you solve that problem. Now, on the other side of that coin, if builders are feeling tight or skilled laborers are feeling tight and they're not finding jobs in the market, they're going to go to another industry. And typically, skilled laborers, they will end up going to the mining sector. So I think that the main force at play right now is a housing issue. It's a supply issue. And if we can resolve the housing issue, then you'd probably see some affordability return to the market. In Sydney, some of the councils have resisted development. There's probably two styles of development. One is like master plan style developments where you're building, 3,000 units and you're creating a whole, basically like a mini suburb within a suburb. And the other one that, from what I can see, is a lot of Sydney councils have resisted something called the missing middle piece, which is like townhouses, villas, manor homes, terraces, that style of development. If you go around Sydney, you don't see many brand new townhouses anymore. And they used to be a thing, right? You'd find older ones, you don't see new ones. And a lot of councils just have resisted that. And right now we're in a housing crisis, meaning we don't have enough stock to meet the demand. And it's a problem. Now, some of these councils may have resisted for the right reasons. So if you're thinking master plan, 3,000, 5,000 homes, yeah, you probably need to take a beat and really think about things and think things through, because you can't just create a suburb within a suburb for 3,000 people, you really need to think about infrastructure. So where are these people, how are they going to travel to work? Are they all going to travel by car? Is it going to cause a gridlock for an hour and a half? Do we end up wanting to look like LA? Or if there's transport, or is the transport network getting built? And then also then you look at the facilities in that local area. Is it going to cause a strain on local schools or hospitals? So those types of developments, I think you do need to take a bit more time. You do need to get community feedback. You need to get council feedback. And you need to really plan that out. Otherwise, you're going to have pockets of new homes and people are going to struggle getting from A to Z. But the other style of development is that missing middle piece. So townhomes, which I believe it's necessary. I think it's needed in Sydney. Typically, if you go to anybody, most people will say, hey, I want to buy a house. That's my first preference. I want a bit of land. I want a house. After that, then most people will say, hey, I want to buy a townhouse. If I can't get a townhouse, I'm going to look for a villa. If I can't get a villa, then I'll go for an apartment or a unit. Right now, no one's building townhomes at the moment. So I think it's an opportunity for the market to meet the demand. And I think if government and council and community can get on board on that style of development, I think that will definitely help the housing crisis right now. If you look at the data, foreign investment only makes up a small portion of the property market, probably less than 5% of the property market. And most foreign investors aren't buying the everyday property. They're probably buying higher end properties, or they're buying properties to actually develop. So when they're buying properties to develop, I think it's a good thing. They're putting more stock on the market. But secondly, also, I think any type of investment in the market is a good thing. Yes, we're saying housing affordability is one piece of the puzzle, but there's the other side of the puzzle, which is the rental crisis. So people who can't afford to buy and they're still renting, right? So rents are increasing because same thing, supply and demand. Right? So if you have an investor that's willing to put a property on the market and acquire that property and put it out for rental, that answers a piece of the puzzle as well, which is the rental crisis. I don't think foreign investment is a bad thing. I actually think it's a good thing. So I think policies, government policies, tax incentives and grants, I think the government's doing the right thing, helping first home buyers to get a foot into the door. They need it. It's a bit far reach right now for a first home buyer to get into the market, especially in Sydney. If you're a first home buyer, there is many grants there. So I'm helping a couple right now that you can potentially stack a deal and get your foot in the door. So you've got your first home loan deposit, you've got, which is a 10K grant if you fit within the parameters. You got first home loan deposit scheme, which basically the government can guarantee your loan so you don't need to pay mortgage insurance. And we know mortgage insurance is a very high amount. With that scheme, you can have as little as a 5% deposit and not pay mortgage insurance. Now, I never had that in my time. The other one in New South Wales at the moment is first home buyer scheme, which is basically a stamp duty concession. If you fit within the perimeters, you're not paying stamp duty. Now, stamp duty, you estimate about 5 or 5.5% of your purchase costs. So it's a massive savings just to get your foot in the door. And so I think all of these incentives and schemes and grants that the governments are producing is good, because I think it helps first home buyers get into the market now rather than, saving more money, waiting whilst property prices increases. Do I think it increases demand or property prices? Maybe it increases a bit of demand, but the demand was already there. We're just activating them, and it's either going to be now or after. And it's not everybody that is going to wake up today and say, hey, I'm going to buy a property. You need to be financially ready to actually buy that property. You've needed to plan for it. You've needed to save that deposit. So it's not like, hey, tomorrow we switch on these policies and there's an influx of people buying, right? Everyone's got to be ready for it. The solution to the housing crisis is we need to build out of it. We need to increase supply to meet demand. The reality is demand's been there for many, many years. It's just ramped up through rapid migration. And the current government is doing things to, soften or maybe increase supply rather. They've signed the housing accord where they're putting up their 1 million new homes across the nation within the next 5 years across all states, right? And they're facilitating that by asking industry, developers, fund managers to come together and see how we can actually resolve that together. The government's also putting 30,000 new housing development for social housing, which hasn't happened for a very, very long time. And that's probably one of the problems. Previous governments haven't actually invested in that. So I think this government is doing what they can. However, all of this is at the beginning stage. So we're talking about a 5-year materialization. It's not going to make any material impact today. And the pain is we're feeling it today. So I think from my perspective, I think I'd like to see maybe in New South Wales, governments and councils and communities come together and really consider the missing middle piece, which is townhouses, villas, terraces. They're things that you can switch on immediately. I know there's a lot of support from what I can see at the moment for it, but I think that needs to materialize. What I'd really like to see is maybe community, government and councils come together, form a plan where it's a win-win-win strategy, just putting it out there. Why can't a mum and dad who owns a property that's on a 900 square meter block that's zoned in a townhouse area join forces with a builder, knock it down, build 3 or 4 townhouses. The government provides a low interest to facilitate that build, and then also have maybe one of those units on a rent to buy for maybe a first home buyer, and that might be a way that everyone can win. But I think the answer to the housing crisis is supply. I think if we endorse that missing middle piece right now, you're going to have a lot of mum and dads, investors, or even boomers, who want to maximize their property that they've been holding on to for 30, 40 years. They can maximize the return on that now and, knock down and rebuild, and you'd have a lot of supply within the next 2 years. A townhouse development would probably take 1 year to build. It's not like a master plan. You're not building 3,000 units. It's much more quicker, much more faster. Thanks for watching this episode or listening to this episode of Catching Up with Property. This episode, we went deep on the housing affordability and crisis in Sydney right now. If you have any comments or questions, please leave a comment below. Bye.